Shalom Aleichem. Welcome. I'm Lisa Newman, the Yiddish Book Center's Director of Publishing and Public Programs, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this evening's program, Litvaks in Love, with Professor David G. Roskies. Before we get started, please note that your audio will be muted and your video off throughout the program. You may send questions via the question panel, which is located at the lower right-hand side of your screen. We ask that you keep questions short and refrain from sending comments so that we can try to get to all of this evening's questions. It's my pleasure to introduce David Roskies. David is the Saul and Evelyn Henkind Chair Emeritus in Yiddish Literature and Culture and a Professor Emeritus of Jewish Literature at the Jewish Theological Seminary. A prolific author, editor, and scholar, he has published 11 books and received numerous awards. A native of Montreal, Canada, and a product of its Yiddish secular schools, he was educated at Brandeis University, where he received his doctorate in 1975. Welcome, David.
Good evening, everyone.
Great to see you. I know the audience is in for a real treat. I absolutely couldn't put the book down. Huge thanks for writing it and everything else. Illuminating read. So over to you, and we'll see you when you're done.
Okay. So thank you. Thank you, Lisa, for inviting me into the Yiddish Book Center to talk about my favorite subject. And thank you to Wayne State University Press for giving me a second chance to put out a revised, expanded edition of my memoir, Truly Verschönert und Verbessert, in paperback. And thank you to all of you for staying home on this cold night to share in this moment. So let's start at the beginning. No one chooses when or how to be born. But as we know from the Torah, birth order is everything. My parents, Label and Masha Roskies, he from Bialystok, she from Vilna, had 4 surviving children, 2 born in Europe, 2 born in Canada. They were spaced roughly 6 years apart, but it wasn't planned that way. It was because that was how my parents achieved agency over the chaos of their historical circumstances. I was the last in line. I was both the muzinik and the ben skunim. The muzinik, I was the youngest, the most pampered, the most indulged. And the ben skunim, I was the child of old age. I was born to give my mother, at the age of 42, that was considered pretty old in those days, a new lease on life. I was born a Lamed Tet, okay? That stands for Litvak Tahor, a pure-blooded Litvak, on both sides. And I was born into a multi-generational matriarchy. Why is that? Well, it's because many Litvak families derive their family names from a matriarchal figure, and I don't think that's an accident. So you have Sirkis, and Sirkin comes from Sorke, Sarah. You have Rivkin from Rivke. You have Broches from Brocha. You have Reines from Reine, and you have Roskies from a great-great-grandmother whose name was Roys, and her children were Royskes Kinder. And Royskes became Roskes, became Roskies. In my story, the dominant matriarchal gene is not the Bialystok Roskies branch of the family, but the Vilna Velcher branch of the family. So we start with Fradl Matz Velcher, born in 1863, died in 1921, whose full-size portrait hung over my parents' nuptial bed. And there was Masha Velcher Roskies, born in 1906, died in 1999. She was the only child of Fradl and her second marriage to Yisroel Velcher. And that was the only branch of her huge family to survive and produce a lineage, new generations of Jews. And that comes across very vividly in the family tree. So what did matriarchy mean for us growing up? For each of us was a constellation. revolving around her son. Our existence, our purpose in life was defined by my mother. Each had his or her assigned role. So Binyamin, the firstborn, was der Kroin von Kopf. She is the crown upon my head. Then came Ruth, then came Eva, and then came me. Der Ausgebettener bei Gott. I was God's gift to my mother. Well, can you do better than that? I lived in the orbit of her love, punctuated by 3 meals a day, where I'm the last person to get up from the table for 17 years at a stretch. So the first Litvak in love is me. I'm in love with my mother, and I'm in love with my mother tongue. But as I come of age, and this happens pretty young in the story, I learn a bitter truth, that I was born too late. I'm sitting at the table at breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and I just want to mention that until 7th grade, I was bused home for lunch every day. That meant that I spent an average of 3 hours a day on the school bus. It wasn't such an easy childhood. But at breakfast, lunch, and dinner, what I learn is that the seat of true love and loyalty and the object of longing no longer exists, because time is cut in half. There is time before and there is time after. My mother's world ended in 1940, she says, the year of their exodus from Europe. And everything of lasting significance, everything of beauty, everything of sublime meaning, of mystery, belongs to another time and place. Yiddishland, one, is on the other side of time. And the courtyard on Zavalna Street, 2830, is the epicenter of the world, where my mother was born in December 1906 and lived until her marriage on the 14th of February, 1930, 24 years. In that courtyard was the venerable Matz Press, established by Yehuda Leib Matz in 1869. And Kochanowski's kindergarten, where Masha goes to school, and Badanis's bakery, and I think an orphanage, a Jewish orphanage. On the fancy side of the courtyard, with the spacious apartments and the high ceilings, live the Matz-Welcher family, and that's like a Russian family saga. Fradl Matz and Yisroel Welcher have, sire, 10 children, 6 girls and 4 boys. Yehuda Leib dies and Fradl remarries Yisroel Welcher, and they have 1 surviving child, and that is my mother. Yisroel Welcher is an entrepreneur. He goes off to America and comes back with 6,000 rubles for selling the plates of the Machzer Beis Yisroel to the Hebrew Publishing Company. And that Machzer you can still buy, and I think he named it after himself, Yisroel Welcher. 6,000 rubles. That's a king's ransom. So with that money, he buys the entire courtyard. Now, of this vast family, the ones that we live with, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, are Nyonya, Anushka, and Grisha, her half-brothers and sister. Nyonya is Fradl's favorite. He played the balalaika like a real gypsy. He signed up for the Tsarist army in July of 1914, and he stages a heroic escape from the Germans, from German captivity, and then dies tragically during the great influenza epidemic of 1918. And we relive his death over and over again. Aunt Anushka is her favorite sister and music teacher, and we learn all about her and her tumultuous love life. Grisha and his beautiful wife, Nadia Vinisky, a banker's daughter, and their fabulous home on small Pogolanka, where they will party every night with the visiting actors of Die Bande. Grisha, who will take over the Toz after Tzemach Shabbat dies. And then there are 7 other siblings and spouses and so on. And a wondrous cast of secondary characters that we will grow up with. Tzemach Shabbat, who is the family doctor. The publisher, Boris Kletskin, who visits my grandmother in the summer dacha. There is Max Erich, Imperius, who teaches Yiddish literature at Sofia Gurevich's Gymnasium for Girls. He falls in love and will marry Ida Rosenschein, the most beautiful girl in the class. There is Leib Stotsky, the Wunderkind, who translated the latest songs of Tuvim and Vertinsky into Yiddish, which my mother will sing in Polish, Russian, and Yiddish. There are the actors of Die Bande, later Ararat, the Yiddish cabaret, the 4 Rappel sisters, especially mother's best friend, Malvina Rappel, their director, Yosef Kamyan, and the beautiful Nadia Kareni, his wife. Did I mention Boris Seidman, the love of my mother's life, the man she didn't marry? So I call him Boris Seidman. That's not his real name, but we all knew who he was. Until David Roskies will show up, full of idealism, wearing patches on his elbows, even though he comes from a well-to-do family. That's just the Vilna side of the story. And then will come Krosna in Poland, where my brother Ben is born. And there is Czernowitz in Romania, where they move, where Odele will die, and Ruthie will be born as her replacement child. And where, for example, Itzik Manger will beat his common wife law black and blue in the hotel room. So the second Litvak in love is my mother, arrested in time, refusing to let go of the past. So I tried to capture that in my book, and if you'll allow me 2 sentences, it's the end of a chapter called Cafe Rudnitsky. And this is what I write. If she had married Seidman, who was considerably older than my father, I would have lost a father a whole lot sooner than I did, and probably wouldn't have been born in the first place, because mother wouldn't have needed a child in her middle age, and I would never have grown up believing that what is lost forever is what you love the most. So Litvaks in love is the unrequited love for the past. And that was the strongest bond between my mother and me. So the key to that past was Yiddish. Now, how many times have we heard the litany? Yiddish in our home was the language of secrets. I've heard many people complain, my students bitterly complain that Yiddish was the language of secrets in their home, so they didn't learn Yiddish. Well, guess what? I'm in on the secret. The whole purpose of having me was to make me the repository of Yiddish secrets. And the main repository of the world's secrets are Litvak women. So Fradl Matz has her first commandment, thou shalt not covet another woman's husband. And this is what my mother tells me. She quotes from Fradl. Fradl says, a man may possess 1,000 fine qualities, daughter of mine. He can be handsome, rich, and refined. Just beware of one tiny flaw. He already has a wife. Masha could not afford to slip because, as she explained to me over kompot one day, ich bin a Gesalbte. I was an anointed one. Ich tor nicht schlafen mit kein Mann. I must not sleep with a man out of wedlock. Mother tells me I was the only one of my sisters, that's 6 half-sisters, who hadn't taken up with a married man. So you understand, right, that nothing she tells me over breakfast, lunch, or dinner is age appropriate. Why me? Because everyone else has left the table. So in the book, the core matriarchal narratives are chapters 3 to 6. 3 is called Cafe Rudnitsky. It's about mother's secret rendezvous with Boris Seidman. And she brings her 7-year-old son, Binyamin, in tow as an alibi. So no one will know that this was a romantic tryst. The chapter called Bread is about Anushka's love affair with the incredibly virile Lyova Varshavsky. The next chapter is called Prayer for the Tsar, which is about Fradl Matz's second marriage to Yisrael Velcher, which was not an arranged marriage, but a marriage out of true love. And then there's a chapter called Scribal Errors about Anushka's divorce from Samuel Isakovich and the tragic fate of their daughter, Lyubuchka. Yiddish is key to her stories, key to her songs, key to her sayings, and to her literary salon. It's like you're growing up with a hidden transcript, and it's different from what we learn at school. We all graduate from the Yiddish Volksschule. We get an exemplary Yiddish Hebrew education, but it's totally different. So we learn the school anthem. Lo mir singen, lo mir singen, lo mir singen a Lied zu der jiddischer Schul. Was is allemen, was is allemen, was is allemen uns a so teuer. So look, don't get me wrong. It's a beautiful hymn, and I still remember the lyrics. I learned them 70 years ago. It's very stirring, right? But that's a school curriculum. We have our own anthem, our own family anthem, written by Mordechai Gebirtig, and it's called Kum Leibke Tanzen. It's about a girl singing to her boyfriend Leibke, giving him chapter and verse about why he must get with it and learn how to dance. And it became our anthem because my father's name was Leibke, and we thought that it was written about him. Leibke, mein Lieber, es wird kein Guts nicht geben. Du bringst mit deiner Kschones mich von Geduld heraus. Du musst dich lernen tanzen, ich schwör bei unser Leben. Elonit ist bald schon mit uns ois. Möchtest du sein, wer du bist, a verbrennter Zionist. Abundov jetzt, wemmen geht es on. Alle Isten seit der Zeit und euch die a gute Leid lernen Tango und Charleston. So Yiddish is the secret. Yiddish is the secret transcript of Litvaks in love. It unlocks the secrets of the Jewish past. And it is, for us, the secret of Jewish culture and creativity. Okay, so Lisa, what would you like to ask me?
Oh, so much. I guess the first question I would have is, how did you come to write this memoir? And notably, it is the first book that you've written many books. It's the first one without any footnotes.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Look, so even from this short introduction, you understand that my mother was larger than life. And for me, she was the central person and personality. And I always knew that the time would come and I would need to write a book about her. But as long as she was alive, she was too much with me. So, so it's the early summer of 1999, right? And I'm teaching Yiddish at Oxford. And I begin to outline the book that I want to write. I have 46 chapter headings. It takes me a while to get started because I can't find the narrative voice. I've never written anything like this, and I have a different voice for my scholarly writing, and that's not appropriate. But what is the proper voice? So later that summer, right after I come home, in fact, my mother dies at the age of 93. when I get up from Shiva, the day after I get up from Shiva, I start writing. And it takes me 2 years to write those chapters. And for those 2 years, she's still alive for me because I don't want to let go of her. And I'm talking to her and I'm arguing with her and I'm screaming at her and I'm laughing with her and I'm writing the book. And as I'm writing the book, especially the first part, I'm trying to do the impossible. I'm trying to capture the associative flow of her storytelling. And I'm writing these long run-on sentences. Because the way my mother told stories, what drove a story was her mood. It was a state of mind at the time of telling. It's not a baba maisa. It's not, oi, Davidl, let me tell you a story of long ago. It's not the way it works. What triggers a story is something infuriating, something sad, something hilarious. And that will trigger one memory after another, after another, after another. So my mother has a fixed repertoire of individual tales from her life, but she recombines them in this infinite number of ways and then makes a new story out of it. I'm her biographer. I'm trying to make sense of all of this. So I have to fill in the dates and the place names. I have to give the story some sense of causality. And that's when I realized that, I have to break it all up into stories and so that people can pick it up and read them as stories. So it finally does take shape, and the book's in 3 parts. The book is in 3 parts. The first part is called Table Talk, because as I described, it's all happening around the table. It's a novel of adventure and love. It's a large screen, huge geographic expanse. You really need a map to negotiate it, right? But we know that Vilna is the city of romance. There's no question, okay? But time is elastic. It doesn't know any boundaries. Everything is all bound up together. So that's the first part. The middle part is called Talking Back, which is a kind of a Bildungsroman, because I, the narrator, am learning. I'm learning to become a Yiddish writer. I'm learning to study traditional texts. I'm assuming the mantle of Yiddish. Yiddishland, too, is Montreal from the ages of 12 to 17 when I leave home. And it has French titles. One title is called Playing Solitaire. The other is called The Soirée. Another one's called Etudes. It's pretty experimental section. And the last section is called Jew Speak, where I'm on the road. And this is Yiddishland 3. It's a quest. I'm looking for Vilna. I'm looking in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. I'm looking in Somerville, Massachusetts. I'm looking in Soviet Moscow. I'm looking in New York City. I'm looking in Poland. I'm looking in Yeltsin's Russia. And then we come back to Montreal at the very end. So what this is that I'm meeting some of the heroes and heroines of my mother's stories, but I also discover that Jewish history didn't end in 1940. It didn't even end in 1948, the year of my birth. Okay, so then what happens? So I have this unwieldy manuscript, 46 chapters long, and I give it to a professional editor to read, and I get it back from her, and she says, listen, you've really written 2 books, not one. One is an autobiography, and the other is a memoir. And she proceeds, and I should really know this because I'm a professor of literature, but okay. She proceeds to just tell me how they are different, and I understand that they are really fundamentally different. So I say to her, okay, Elisheva, tell me the truth. I'm paying you to tell me the truth. Which would you choose? And she says something to the effect of, well, David, your mother is a very, very interesting character. But the story of a young man who cannot find true love because he hasn't separated from his mother, that story has already been told. Like D.H. Lawrence, Sons and Lovers, that kind of thing. Well, okay, so I get it. She's a much more interesting character than I am, and I'll grant you that. So I eliminate 14 chapters that don't directly relate to my mother, trying to focus the book only on her. Then I had to do two things, two very important things. One is that I add a genealogy where I identify and give a short biography of all the true characters in the book, because it occurs to me that people won't know whether these people were alive or not. Did I make it up or did I not make it up? So I provide a biography. And then, really as an afterthought, I add a CD of 10 songs, right? So I don't know if you can see this. This is the first edition, and it has a CD. Remember, remember CDs? Okay, CDs of 10 songs of my mother's singing. And these are the songs, only the songs that are referenced in the book itself, because I stole her voice. I want to give the people back their voice. So that was how the book comes into being. And then let's see, what else? It comes out in Hebrew. This is the Hebrew edition, and I'm very proud of the fact that I came up with the title in Hebrew. It's called Be'eretz Mameloshen. It's a play on Be'eretz Avotenu. Usually the land of Israel is the land of our forefathers. So this is the land of Mameloshen, of the mother tongue. And then the Russian edition, very handsome edition, called Strana Yiddisha. And now the 15th anniversary edition, revised and expanded and so on. So yeah, that's it.
I have to say, your mother just absolutely captured me. What the storytelling, as you say, where it weaves its way in so many different directions over the table. It's just fabulous. So I read the original edition. Tell me a little bit about what's different about this second version.
Oh, okay. So the first thing I have to tell you is about the miraculous discovery of Aunt Anushka's photo album in Kovna, today Kaunas, Lithuania, by an incredible man named Richard Schofield, an expat British photographer. He finds this album there, and he spends months and months and months trying to figure out who are the people in the album. I'll just cut to the chase. A young historian named Soleil Valunate finds the missing link. And the missing link is a biographical entry at the end of Yiddishlands about Anushka. She has the name Anna Warszawski, and she's looking for any information on Anna Warszawski. And up comes a biography of her in Yiddishlands, which says she was the beloved sister of Masha Roskies, who taught her music at Kochanowski's kindergarten and then went on to run the Engel choir in Kovna. She already knows about the Engel choir, so she makes the identification. And we have 110 family photographs from that album. So Wayne State was very, very kind, and they allowed me to have an insert of photographs, both from my mother's album and from Anushka. So we have 3 times as many photographs in this edition, spanning an entire century. And they're really, it's worth the price of admission. Okay, that's number 1. What else? Number 2, okay, is the cover. It's a split screen cover. On the top is Anushka with her daughter Lubachka, and on the bottom is Masha with her muzinik. But there's a black diagonal dividing time before and time after. Then I wrote an introduction, sort of giving the backstory. What else? There's a family tree, very important. And then there are two missing chapters. I didn't restore all 14, but I went back and I found two chapters that I shouldn't have omitted. One is called A Piece of Cake, which is about our return to Russia in 1993 to teach at Project Judaica. And the other is my favorite chapter, which I left out, called Footloose in Vilna. It was supposed to be the original ending, but I had a failure of nerve. Had a failure of nerve.
Why did you have a failure of nerve?
Well, I never wrote a book without footnotes, and I thought I had gone too far, that this chapter would give the game away. What I mean is, okay, so it's a mixture of memoir and autobiography, fine, but it actually is something completely different. It didn't have a name yet when I started writing. There's a name for this. It's called creative nonfiction. Creative nonfiction. Okay. But this last chapter sort of pushed the envelope because I wanted to describe my vicarious childhood, where 3 times a day I was living in a time machine. And I decided that the best way to do this is by imagining a trip to Vilna in September 1939. I'm 15 years old. I go back to Vilna and everyone's still alive. And I meet the main characters in my mother's story. So this is really unadulterated fiction. There's no factual basis to this at all, right? How can I do that? Can I end the book on a completely counterfactual, counter-historical note? And I decided I couldn't. I decided I couldn't.
I know I asked you when we talked about the program, if you would choose something to read, would it?
Oh, okay,
Wanna read
okay,
from
okay.
that chapter?
Yes. So, okay.
Is that okay to ask you to do that?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, okay. Okay, hold on.
Pique the curiosity here. Yeah.
Okay, hold on. All right. Yeah, okay. So let me read you the original ending then. Since I already mentioned this chapter, this is how the book was supposed to end, and now this is the way the book ends. Remember, this is an imaginary trip in the summer of 1939 to Vilna. Vilna may not have a permanent Yiddish theater, but it has every stripe of Jewish youth movement, and I am forced to choose sides. Heeding Grisha's stern warning, and in deference to my friend Hannah Furstenberg, I choose Hashomer HaTzair. Their headquarters is within walking distance of Grisha's, and to compensate for my bourgeois class origins, I try to impress the collective with my knowledge of modern Hebrew. Only I make the mistake of using expressions like ma pitom and lo ichpatiyut that haven't been coined yet. And Rezel, the girl of my dreams, whose sumptuous braid would seem to belie her party discipline, insists on being called Shoshana and will not break ranks to go roller skating with me. At best, she will meet me tonight at the Jungwald evening, where Hirschke Glick, one of their comrades, will be participating. I am 15 years old and have not yet known a woman. If she would only let me, I would rescue her from this place on the strength of my Canadian passport. Seeing my disappointment, Rezel Shoshana invites me along to their outing later today. They're going to Ponar. Geht nicht dahin, I blurt out. Then in Hebrew, Al telchu lisham. How can they picnic in Ponar, the future killing field of Vilna Jewry? As they look at me with pity and derision, I understand what a mistake it was to come back, as if communing with their living presence could alter the course of time. And although hearing Lazer Wolf declaim his poetry, a cross between Dada and doggerel, is worth the whole trip, and I marvel at the love that the young aspiring poets of Jungwald evince towards Lazer, the ugliest man I have ever seen, with the short-cropped hair of a convict. Despite this last exalted evening, I am eager, no, desperate to get out of here, of there, and then. Nadinka accompanies me to the train station. With so little traffic on Sunday morning, we take a scenic route along the Zakret forest. Let me see your hands, she says, as she takes off her gloves. And I measure my hand against hers. Remarkably, her fingers are as long as mine, thinner, of course, translucent and perfectly manicured. And as we touch hands, I stop my mind from racing ahead to her struggle to survive in the ghetto by giving pedicures, because Grisha will already be dead. Some say shot on a train by an agent provocateur. Others say executed without trial by a firing squad in the first week of the German occupation. And I refuse either to know or to ask how and where she perished, because Nadinka must be as real to me as the gentle touch and the fragrance of her fingers that I will feel all the way to Warsaw. Litvaks in love.
It's quite amazing. I'm not sure I know what to say. So I'll just give that a rest, and I guess I will ask you, what are you working on now?
Two things. In a month from now, about a collection of my essays in Yiddish. My first book in Yiddish will be coming out. It's called Lernen dem Pshat, Essays in Yiddish Literary History. It's 40 years of writing in Yiddish. So that's coming out. And I'm finishing a manuscript. And actually, it's a sequel to Yiddishlands in a way, because 2 chapters of Yiddishland are devoted to Chavorat Shalom, a neo-Hasidic community in Somerville, to which I once belonged. Here in Manhattan, I belong to a traditional egalitarian minyan called Minyan Ma'at. And after October 7th, I decided to drop everything and write the story of Chavurah Judaism. It's the story of how the baby boomer generation created a new model of religious community, and how this model has spread from coast to coast, and how it was then exported to Israel, and how it is changing. So this too is a book very different from any of it I've ever written. And once it's published, you'll be the first to know.
And I will leave a space on my nightstand.
Okay, so
David, your work is really amazing. So let me quickly, so we don't run out of time, start with there's a lot of questions here, in no particular order. Why Somerville?
Well, Somerville is where Chavorat Shalom relocated in the summer of 1969. It was created in 1968, the Chavorat Shalom Community Seminary, by Arthur Green and 6 other rabbis, to create an alternative model of rabbinic training and spiritual fellowship. It was a combination ashram, kibbutz, shtibel, lehrhouse, you name it. I grew up in a Yiddish secular home, but I spent my junior year in Israel, which changed my life. And when I came back to campus, to Brandeis, I felt completely at sea. I needed a community. And the timing was perfect because Chavorat Shalom had just come into being. It was they had just admitted their first group, and I applied for admission. You had to apply. It was a rigorous application process. And I got in, and I actually moved in to the Chavurah. And that is when I began a life of observance through Chavorat Shalom. Yeah, Somerville, Massachusetts.
Could you speak more about the Vilna Yiddish theater culture in place in the community before World War II, given mentions to it vis-a-vis your family and beyond?
Yes. My mother's second home was the Yiddish Cabaret. And she recorded 127 songs for a a research project of Barbara Kirschenblatt Gimblitz. That's why we have recordings of her songs. It's a whole other story. My mother was one of 12 informants, and her whole repertoire was recorded in 6 languages. Well more than half of these songs are cabaret songs that she learned going to the cabaret. So what happens is her mother dies when Masha is 15 years old. Fradelmatz dies of consumption. And that is the overarching tragedy of all our lives, is Fradelmatz's untimely death. And my mother is an orphan, and she needs something to, some vicarious life. And the Yiddish theater cabaret comes to town. Now, I think I mentioned earlier my uncle Grisha and their home on small Pogolanka. Well, my Grisha was actually the chairman of the Yiddish theater committee in Vilna on the eve of the Second World War. According to my mother, whenever the actors came to town, 2 things happened. One is he would bring roses to the lead actress, Malvina Rappel. Okay, an important fact. And the other is that he would invite everybody home after the show, and they would continue to sing and rehearse and enjoy the songs. She knew the entire repertoire by heart. And it was satiric, it was raunchy, it was brilliant, it was topical. And really, this saved my mother from depression. It's where she found her womanhood, because the lead singers were women, and they would dress in drag, and they would get dressed up like Hasidim. They were doing outrageous things. So for my mother, who came from, the house was pretty strict. Her Fradelmatz prayed every morning, and it was a very Orthodox home. The children, well, that's another story, but the upbringing was strictly Orthodox. The theater was like her life. So we grew up on these songs, which we only heard once a year. We had a 1-day-a-year theater season, well, twice, on the way to Cape Cod and on the way back from Cape Cod. It was an 8-hour trip, and my mother refused to let us listen to the radio because the radio was in English, and we couldn't hear English in the car. That was verboten. So what did we do for 8 hours each way? She would sing and draw my father into song, and it's the only time we would hear the 2 of them singing duets and love songs. Litvaks in love. They were love songs. Most of the repertoire was love songs in Yiddish, but also Vilna was a multicultural city. They also knew Polish love songs and Russian love songs. So Alexander Vertinsky was a very popular singer, and they would sing his songs in Russian, and then in the translation into Yiddish by Leib Stotsky, whom I mentioned before. So this was her entire life. And then she marries my father and goes off to a factory town. Okay, so those are lean years living in Krosno, where Benjamin is born. But then my father is invited to Romania to open the first rubber factory in northern Romania. And they lived there from, 1934 for 6 years, until the war, until 1940. And there, the Banden disbands and they become Ararat, but it's the same actors. They come gastrolieren to Chernovitz. Okay. So one more piece of this, which is quite important. My mother begins performing in Chernovitz in the Masada Club and accompanies herself on the piano. She had a beautiful voice, and the whole Matz family, incredibly musical. and she's performing the repertoire of Mordechai Gebirtig, like the song that I sang to you, Kum lebke tanzen. So what happens is the actors of Ararat are visiting in Krakow, and they tell Gebirtig about my mother. Listen to this. They tell Gebirtig about my mother, that there's this woman who performs the songs on stage in Czernowitz. So he takes a copy of his Meine Lieder and inscribes it to her and puts in manuscripts of 2 unpublished songs and sends it off to my mother as a gift. So there's Gebirtig, and then and the other very popular songwriter is Moshe Broderson, who wrote most of the songs for the Ararat. So this becomes then part of her repertoire. More than her repertoire, it's the siddur that she davens from.
At what point did you realize the world that you grew up in and the importance of that moment and all of those people?
Well, the first awakening was going off to Brandeis. That was really a rude awakening. So let me just back up. I know that my mission is to save Yiddish by the time I'm 15, and I describe that transformation in the middle section. And I co-founded a Yiddish youth movement called Jugendruf, which is now celebrating its 60th anniversary. And I guess I am the Zayda of the movement. Since I'm still alive, I am the living grandfather of this movement. And that takes me to New York, where I meet many people and writers and okay. So as far as I'm concerned, Yiddishland is Montreal, New York, and it's alive and well. Well, but not really alive and well, because we could already see that it was crumbling before our very eyes, which is why we created Jugendruf. We were going to keep Yiddish alive, and that was my mission. And then I go off to Brandeis, and I meet American Jews. I'm on a campus of self-hating Jews. I never met self-hating Jews before. How could you hate being a Jew? How could you be embarrassed about being a Jew? How could you dissociate yourself from your parents? I just didn't get it. So that's when it began to dawn on me that the upbringing that I had was rather anomalous, unique, but that I had to work with that and fight back.
How did your family get out of Europe in 1940?
It was thanks to my grandfather, David Roskies, and that's a chapter called The Last Seder, I think it's called. A true story. You couldn't make this up. He was already blind by that time, but he could see what no one else could see. He convenes the Roskies family in Bialystok. It's April 1939. And he tells the assembled, there's going to be a war in Europe. Hitler will not stop until he conquers all of Europe. We've got to get out. The place to go is Canada because it's an underdeveloped country. So what we're going to do is as follows. My 2 oldest sons, I'm sending you off to Canada to establish a foothold. And then you will bring over your wives, and then in sequence, we'll go in birth order, and then you'll bring me over at the end. That's the order it was supposed to happen. It's more complicated, but he is the patriarch, and whatever he says goes. So the first 3 brothers do make it across, and then the war starts, and my father is left in Romania. So that's still relatively safe. And he is supposed to rescue my grandfather in Bialystok. Only what happens is Bialystok is taken over by the Red Army. It becomes part of the Soviet Union. And they try mightily to get my grandfather out, but they fail. Meanwhile, my father is planning his escape from Romania. He manages to get a one-way visa to leave the country on condition that he never returns. They go to Bucharest. They take the last train. This is, one of those stories. Everyone who survives has a story like this. There are just infinite varieties to this story. So my father goes off to Bucharest to arrange for travel, and my mother gets on the last train out of Chernovitz before the Red Army conquers Romania. That would have been his death knell anyway, because he was a capitalist. He would have died immediately. And then from Bucharest, they make it to Athens, and they go through the Strait of Gibraltar, and they make it to, just like in Casablanca, Lisbon. And they get out of Europe from Lisbon and arrive in New York Harbor on Erev Yom Kippur 1940, en route to Canada, where the Roskies have already established themselves.
And let me make this the last question. Do you recommend going to Vilna today? My grandfather came from Vilna, and I'm very interested in going there.
Oh my goodness. We've been back 6, 7, 8 times. And it gets more beautiful every time. Just let me know and I'll meet you there.
If I may,
it's a magical city. No question about it.
Read the book before you go. David, thank you so much for everything that you bring to all of our understanding of Yiddish, and the book is wonderful. Again, Yiddishlands, a memoir by David Roskies. It's available at shop.yiddishbookcenter.org and wherever great and good books are found. So thanks again. Keep writing, stay in touch, and come back soon for another visit.
Thank you. A gute Nacht.
Good night.
Bye, everyone. Good night.
Good night. I want to thank our producer, Elizabeth Carteropoli, behind the scenes, always making things run smoothly. And a big thanks to all of our members whose ongoing support makes all of our ongoing work possible. Visit yiddishbookcenter.org/donate, where you can renew your membership, give a membership gift, learn how to give a tribute gift, or how to become a sustaining member. If you would like to join us again next Thursday, sorry, we have a few weeks, Thursday, March 27th at 7 p.m. when we present The Chief Rabbi's Funeral with Scott D. Segelman. To view our calendar of events and to register, please visit yiddishbookcenter.org/events. Thanks for joining us tonight. Until next time, stay strong, stay healthy, and stay in touch. Take care now.